Hello everyone, and welcome to the channel, Sola Stories. I am 75 years old. When I was hospitalized, my son wouldn't answer my calls. Then, my daughter-in-law posted a photo that broke my heart and made me write my will. To all my listeners, all my friends, the day I was admitted to the hospital, my son and daughter-in-law threw a party at home to celebrate. Tell me, how could I possibly recover from my illness after that? What was even more heartbreaking was that they knew I was fighting for my life, yet they chose to ignore it, completely absorbed in the joy of their party. Faced with this unforgivable pain, I refused to forgive them and did something that made them lose everything. So, what exactly happened that sent me to the hospital? And what was so special that my son and daughter-in-law threw a party to celebrate? And how did I make them lose it all, forcing them to live in regret? Please, listen closely to my story. My name is Eleanor Pierce, and I am 75 years old. There's an old saying about the difficult years of 73 and 84 when you're knocking on death's door. I passed the 73 mark 2 years ago and still feel sharp, though my legs aren't what they used to be. Since my dear husband, Arthur, passed away a year ago, I've been living alone in this historic 3-story brownstone he and I owned in Boston. But that peace was shattered on a late autumn afternoon. That day, my only son, Stephen, moved in with his wife, Tiffany, and my grandson, Caleb. The U-Haul truck they brought, packed with their furniture, was parked right out front, disrupting the quiet of our tree-lined street. "Mom!" Tiffany called out, her voice as sweet as honey, as she rushed over to link her arm with mine the moment she stepped out of the car. "With Dad gone, we just couldn't bear the thought of you living here all alone. Stephen has been so worried he can't eat or sleep." She said this with her eyes sparkling, the perfect picture of a devoted daughter-in-law. "Starting today, we're moving back in with you to liven things up and take care of you." I looked over at my son, Stephen. He had lost weight and looked tired, just nodding silently in agreement with his wife. "Mom, Tiffany's right. If we live closer, we can get here faster if anything happens." How could I refuse such a display of devotion? Besides, living with my children and grandson, seeing them every day, isn't that what every older person dreams of? I happily prepared the entire garden-level floor for the two of them and set up a smaller room for my beloved grandson, Caleb. I truly believed that from that day on, our home would once again be filled with laughter and joy. But I was wrong. Terribly wrong. For the first few days, Tiffany did act like a capable daughter-in-law. She would always say, "Mom, you're older now. Your bones are fragile. You should just sit, drink your tea, and relax. Leave all the housework and cooking to me." Hearing that made my heart swell with pride. I felt so lucky. But her idea of leaving it to me was strange. At breakfast, she'd say, "Mom, I'm just not used to store-bought stuff, you know? It's so processed. Maybe you could get up a little early and make us all some oatmeal from scratch? The way you make it is the best." So, at 75 years old, I found myself getting up in the dark at 5 o'clock in the morning to cook oatmeal. At lunchtime, she would sigh dramatically. "Stephen's been working so hard lately, he needs something to build him up. Could you make him your pot roast? I'm hopeless in the kitchen, and yours is legendary." So, once again, I found myself busy in the kitchen, chopping vegetables and preparing the meat. When the laundry piled up, she'd say, "Mom, this old washing machine is going to ruin my designer dresses. Could you just hand wash these few delicate things for me? And you could just toss your clothes and Caleb's in with them. It'll be cleaner that way." And so, my old, wrinkled hands would be submerged in cold, soapy water again. Just like that, I went from being the owner of the house to its unpaid maid. Tiffany's words were sweet, but her actions were a silent knife, stabbing at my old heart. Under the guise of compliments and requests, she pushed all the work onto me. She wanted gourmet meals, perfectly ironed silk blouses, and floors so clean you could see your reflection. And the person making it all happen was me. And my son, Stephen? He had become a shadow. Every time he saw me coughing from exhaustion, he would just glance over before burying his head back in his plate. He saw me in the middle of winter, lugging heavy laundry baskets up from the basement, and would just walk past without a word. Perhaps in his eyes, his mother's labor was a given, a part of his life that required no thought. One evening, I was too tired and only managed to make a few simple dishes. The moment we sat down at the table, Tiffany frowned. "Oh, Mom, why is dinner so plain tonight? Caleb is a growing boy. This isn't nearly enough nutrition for him." I sighed and replied, "I wasn't feeling very well today, honey." Before I could finish, she cut in. "I know you're tired, Mom. That's why I said to let me handle it. But you insist on doing everything yourself. Well, I guess we'll just have to make do." She said it as if I had volunteered for all this. Stephen, sitting next to her, passed a piece of tofu to his wife and then called over to me. "Mom, if you're tired, you should rest. Tiffany is just worried about the family's health." His words felt like a bucket of ice water poured over my head. Worried about the family's health, but you let a 75-year-old woman do all the work? I didn't say another word. I quietly finished my meal, but from that day on, I was always the last one to sit down at the dinner table. They would eat happily, talking and laughing. By the time I picked up my own bowl, all that was left was cold, stir-fried vegetables and a few scraps of meat at the bottom of the serving dishes. I ate my rice with cold broth, and my heart felt just as cold. Only my grandson, Caleb, was a single ray of light in those dark days. The boy was only 16, but he was so considerate. Many times, he would see me sitting on the front stoop, coughing so hard I couldn't catch my breath, and he would run over to rub my back. "Grandma, you're tired, right? Let me get you a glass of water." Or when Tiffany complained about the chores, he would speak up. "Mom, Grandma is old. Please don't make her do so much work. I can help her clean on the weekends." Immediately, he would get a death stare from his mother, a look that could burn a hole through you. "What do you know? You're just a kid. Go worry about your homework. It's good for Grandma to have something to do. It keeps her active. Haven't you noticed how much healthier she looks since we moved in?" The oppressive heat of a Boston summer afternoon felt like a giant steam room, draining the last bit of strength from my old bones. Tiffany had assigned another long list of chores today. She said friends were coming over for dinner, so I had to polish all the wooden furniture in the house and hand-wash the heavy silk curtains. "Be careful, Mom," she instructed in her sugar-coated, commanding tone. "Everything in this house is valuable, so don't be careless." I had been working since early morning. Sometime after noon, as I was struggling to wring out the last curtain, I suddenly felt the world spin. My vision blurred, and everything in front of me melted into a chaotic mess of colors. My ears were ringing, and the only thing I could hear was my own heart pounding in my chest. I tried to grab onto the stone wall of the small courtyard garden for support, but my legs had no strength left. The last thing I saw was the vibrant green leaves of the magnolia tree swaying above me before I collapsed onto the cold brick patio. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I smelled was the sharp, antiseptic scent of a hospital. The white fluorescent light from the ceiling was so bright it hurt my eyes. Everything around me was a sterile white. A young nurse saw that I was awake and walked over. "Ma'am, you're awake. How are you feeling?" she asked with concern. My voice was barely a whisper. Where am I?" "You're at City General Hospital. You fainted due to high blood pressure. Luckily, your neighbor, Mrs. Davis, came over to visit and saw you lying in the courtyard. She called an ambulance right away. The doctor says you need to stay for a few days for observation," the nurse explained, handing me a cup of warm water. "You'll need to call your family to come handle the admission paperwork and take care of you." Family. Those two words cut my heart like a knife. Besides my only son, Stephen, who else did I have? A wave of grief and sorrow washed over me. Although I had started to see their true colors, deep down, I was still a mother. No matter what your child is like, when you're sick, they are the first person you think of. With trembling hands, I borrowed the nurse's phone and dialed the number I knew so well I could dial it with my eyes closed. It rang for a long time, so long I thought he would never pick up. Finally, a sleepy, annoyed voice came through. "Hello? Who is this?" "Stephen, it's Mom," I said, my voice weak and hoarse. "Mom?" His voice sounded a bit more awake, but still full of impatience. "What is it? Why are you calling at this hour?" "Stephen, I'm at the hospital." I collapsed. The doctor said. Before I could finish, Stephen cut me off, his voice filled with exhaustion and irritation. "What? The hospital? Oh, for God's sake. I'm running a high fever myself. I'm too weak to even walk. And Tiffany has to stay home to take care of me. Mom, you're going to have to find someone else, or just figure it out on your own. I'm too tired. I can't make it. Click. He hung up. Just like that. No more questions, not a single word of concern. Just an excuse, and a poorly crafted lie. I held the phone, my whole body shaking. His last words echoed in my ears. Mom, you're going to have to figure it out on your own. My son. The son I carried for 9 months, the son I raised with all my love, was now telling me this while I lay alone in a hospital bed. My heart turned to ice. Disappointment and pain consumed me, worse than the headache from my high blood pressure. My kind neighbor, Mrs. Davis, brought me some oatmeal. Seeing me all alone, she sighed with pity. A few hours later, my grandniece, Sarah, who happened to be visiting a friend at the same hospital, stopped by to see me. Seeing my tear-streaked face and dazed expression, she sat by my bed and tried to comfort me. Aunt Eleanor, what's wrong? Don't be upset. Getting angry is bad for your recovery. The clever girl opened her phone. How about I show you some funny pictures online to cheer you up? I was in no mood for it, but I didn't want to hurt her feelings, so I nodded. Sarah scrolled through her phone, showing me all sorts of things, from funny videos to beautiful landscape photos. I stared blankly, my mind still lost in its own pain. Then, she stopped on someone's social media profile. Oh hey, that's Tiffany, right? Stephen's wife? She just posted a new photo. I instinctively glanced at the screen, and in that instant, my world shattered. It was a photo taken at a fancy downtown steakhouse. Under the warm yellow lights, their table was covered with expensive dishes and a bottle of red wine. In the picture, my son, Stephen, was beaming, his cheeks flushed with color. He didn't look like he had a high fever or was too weak to move. Beside him, Tiffany was wearing a shimmering dress, her makeup perfect, leaning her head affectionately on her husband's shoulder. My grandson, Caleb, was there too, though his smile seemed a little forced. The three of them were raising their glasses in a toast, looking like the perfect, happy family. That image alone was enough to kill me, but what truly drove the knife into my heart was the caption Tiffany wrote below the picture. Happy 10th anniversary. So nice to finally have a quiet, relaxing night, just us. Just us. Those 2 words were sharper than 1,000 knives, stabbing straight into my chest, crushing the last shred of hope I had. I froze. So my son had lied. He wasn't sick. He and his wife were out celebrating their wedding anniversary. Not only had they abandoned me in my time of need, but they were celebrating my absence. My very existence had become a burden to them, an inconvenience so great that my absence was a reason to celebrate. Aunt Eleanor, what's wrong? Sarah asked in a panic, seeing my face turn deathly pale. The phone slipped from my grasp, clattering against the bed rail. I couldn't hear anything. A buzzing filled my ears, and the blood in my veins felt like it had turned to ice. I had sacrificed my whole life for my son, endured my daughter-in-law's cruelty, lived like a servant in my own home, all for a little bit of family affection in my old age. And what did I get in return? Lies, abandonment, and their joy because I wasn't there. Tears started streaming down my face, but these were no longer tears of simple sadness or pain. They were hot, filled with a bitter saltiness and the deepest resentment. I cried for my own foolishness, for a mother's heart that had been so terribly misplaced. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of my son and daughter-in-law's radiant smiles at their anniversary party appeared before me, seared into my brain like a red-hot brand. The words "just us" echoed in my mind, each repetition a fresh cut on my already wounded heart. My grandniece, Sarah, had fallen asleep in a folding chair next to my bed. Seeing how tired she looked, I didn't have the heart to wake her, but what I had to do next couldn't wait. I gently nudged her. Sarah, honey, could I borrow your phone again? My voice was no longer trembling and weak like it had been that afternoon. It was deep and steady, with a strength that surprised even me. She rubbed her eyes and groggily handed me the phone. Aunt Eleanor, who are you calling? Should I call Stephen for you? No, I answered sharply. I am not calling him. I dialed the number of my old friend, Carol Henderson. It only rang twice before she picked up, her familiar, worried voice on the other end. "Eleanor? Is that you? I heard you were in the hospital. How are you? I was worried sick. I was planning to come see you first thing in the morning. Is Stephen there?" Hearing her voice, a flicker of warmth entered my cold heart, but this was no time for weakness. "Carol," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. "I'm fine. Don't worry. I'm calling you because there's something important I need your help with." "What is it? You sound so serious." "Anything you just tell me. If I can help, I will." I took a deep breath of the cold, dry hospital air, then spoke each word clearly and firmly, giving myself no room to waver. "Carol, isn't your grandson James a senior real estate agent at that big firm in Boston?" "Yes, he is. Why do you ask?" Carol sounded surprised. "Tell him," I continued, my voice even more resolute, "that I want to sell the brownstone that Arthur and I owned on Union Park Street. I want an immediate sale. I'll take any price as long as it's fast." Silence. A heavy silence hung between us. I could picture Carol's shocked expression. A few seconds later, she practically shouted into the phone, her voice filled with disbelief. "What are you talking about? Sell the house? Eleanor, are you out of your mind? That house was Arthur's life's work. How can you just sell it like that? What about Stephen? Does he know about this?" "He doesn't need to know," I said, my voice as cold as ice. "And from this day forward, it has nothing to do with him." "Eleanor, calm down and listen to me. Let's not rush into things. Even married couples have their disagreements. It's normal for mothers and sons to argue. You're sick right now. You're not thinking clearly. Don't make a decision you'll regret. When you get out of the hospital, we can talk about it, okay?" Carol pleaded, her voice full of genuine concern for me. I knew she meant well. Anyone hearing this would think I was just an old fool who had lost her senses in a fit of anger. But only I knew that I was more clear-headed than I had ever been. "Carol," I interrupted, the finality in my voice silencing her. "I've made up my mind. You're my best friend, that's why I'm telling you." My love for them was thrown on the ground and stomped on. They took my sacrifices for granted. While I'm lying here, they're celebrating because I'm not around to be a burden. "Tell me, this house, my husband's legacy, can I leave it to such ungrateful people? I would rather sell it to a stranger who understands its value than let it fall into the hands of people who only know greed and hypocrisy. This house, I will never leave it to those ungrateful children." I wasn't crying, but every word I spoke was soaked in a lifetime of accumulated pain and resentment. There was a long silence on the other end. Perhaps Carol sensed my unbreakable resolve. Finally, she sighed heavily. "I understand. Since you've made your decision, okay. I'll talk to my grandson first thing in the morning. You just take care of yourself." "Thank you, Carol. You're the only one I can trust with this." After the call ended, I handed the phone back to Sarah. She looked at me with a mixture of fear and confusion. I just gently stroked her hair and turned to face the window. The night outside was still, the lights of Boston twinkling like distant stars. In contrast to the storm that had just raged in my heart, I now felt an extraordinary sense of calm, like a person who has walked through a hurricane for too long and finally found peace in the eye of the storm. No more fear, no more hesitation, and no more attachment. For 4 days, I lay in that hospital room. The 4 white walls and the smell of disinfectant had become familiar. In those 4 days, Stephen and Tiffany had vanished from my life completely, as if being a mother and grandmother was never a part of their responsibilities. The day I was discharged, the doctor gave me a long list of instructions. Maintain a cheerful mood, avoid emotional stress, eat regularly. I nodded silently and signed the papers. The moment I walked out of the hospital doors, I saw other families bustling around their loved ones, carrying bags and chattering away. A pang of sadness hit me, but it was fleeting, like an autumn breeze. The pain had already hardened into resolve. I no longer had expectations, so I could no longer be disappointed. I hailed a taxi by myself. When I gave the driver the address of that house, my voice didn't tremble in the slightest. Union Park Street. It was once my home, then it became my prison, and today it would become a battlefield. The taxi moved slowly through the familiar Boston streets. The late summer sun was golden like honey, glinting off the old brickwork of the buildings. I watched the scenery pass by, feeling a terrifying calm inside. I didn't feel like I was going home. I felt like a general returning to the capital to quell a rebellion. All weakness and sorrow had been left behind in that cold hospital room. The car stopped at the corner of my street. I paid the fare and walked slowly, seeing the outline of my stately old brownstone from a distance. It stood there silently, dignified, a witness to so many years. Just then, a sleek black sedan pulled up and parked in front of the main entrance. The door opened, and a young man in a well-tailored suit got out first. He was tall and handsome, with a professional and capable air about him. This was my friend Carol's grandson, James Carter, the agent I was entrusting with this. He walked around to the other side and opened the door for a middle-aged couple. The man had a kind face, dressed in casual clothes made from expensive fabric. The woman beside him exuded an air of elegance, carrying a designer handbag. They were the first, and perhaps the last, potential buyers to see the house. James saw me, and a flash of surprise crossed his eyes, quickly replaced by respect. He walked quickly towards me and greeted me. "Mrs. Pierce, hello. I'm James Carter. My grandmother, Carol, already called me. Did you just get out of the hospital? You still look a little pale." I nodded slightly, offering a steady smile. "Thank you, James. I'm fine. And these must be Mr. and Mrs. Chen?" "Hello," I said to them. "I do apologize. I've just come from the hospital, so the house might be a bit of a mess." The couple looked surprised and a little embarrassed. The woman quickly waved her hands. "Oh no, not at all. Please don't apologize. We are the ones intruding. We heard from James that you were looking for a quick sale. That's the only reason we came so suddenly. You should be resting after being ill." "It's no trouble," I said, taking the familiar set of keys from my pocket. The sound of the metal jingling was crisp in the quiet street. "Please, come in. Make yourselves at home." I inserted the key into the lock, and the heavy mahogany door groaned as it swung open, revealing the sunlit courtyard and the magnolia tree, its scent still lingering in the air. "Oh my," the woman gasped, her eyes lighting up with awe and admiration. "It's beautiful. To find such a classic and peaceful place right in the heart of the city." Her husband nodded in agreement, his eyes scanning the entire space, from the moss-covered stones of the small fountain to the polished dark wood of the support beams. "This architecture is magnificent. It must have taken someone with incredible dedication and taste to maintain a property like this so well." James glanced at me, and seeing my calm demeanor, he began to slip into his professional role, starting to explain the house's history, structure, and value. But I gently raised my hand to stop him. "Allow me," I said softly. "It's only right that I give the tour of this house myself." The couple listened intently, their expressions showing not just an appreciation for its material value, but a genuine respect for the history I shared. I led them through every room, from the bedrooms with their antique four-poster beds to the kitchen with its old iron stove. For every corner, every object, I attached a small story. I told them how my husband, Arthur, had repaired the roof tiles with his own hands, and how I used to sit by a certain window mending our son's clothes. When I mentioned my son, my heart stung for only a moment before returning to its calm. "Ma'am," the husband said suddenly, his voice full of sincerity, "we absolutely love this house. If you agree, we're prepared to offer you the highest market price, and we promise you, we will keep everything just as it is. We will care for it just as you and your husband did." I looked deep into his eyes and believed him. I nodded, a small smile forming on my lips. That would be wonderful. My husband's life's work has finally found the right people. Just at that moment, the front door was thrown open from the outside. Stephen and Tiffany were back. They were returning from a massive shopping spree. Tiffany walked in first, her arms laden with at least 5 or 7 shopping bags from high-end brands, clothes, shoes, cosmetics, everything. Her makeup was perfect, she was glowing, and she was laughing loudly with her husband. Stephen followed behind, also struggling with several large bags, a look of tired satisfaction on his face, the look of someone who had just spent a lot of money. When they stepped through the door and saw the scene in the courtyard, me, a stranger in a suit, and an elegant middle-aged couple, their laughter died instantly. The surprise on Tiffany's face quickly turned to suspicion, then erupted into a blazing fire of rage. She carelessly dropped the expensive shopping bags on the ground, put her hands on her hips, and her eyes, sharp as knives, scanned from James to the couple. "Who are you people?" she shrieked, her shrill voice shattering the home's classic serenity. "Who gave you permission to just walk into my house?" The couple was clearly taken aback by her aggressive tone and took a step back. James, ever the professional, stepped in front of them, his voice calm but firm. "Good afternoon, ma'am. My name is James Carter, from the real estate agency. We are here at the invitation of the homeowner, Mrs. Eleanor Pierce, to view the property." "The homeowner?" Tiffany let out a savage, cold laugh. Then she saw the property listing pamphlet in James's hand. Her face changed dramatically, from furious red to a horrified, deathly white. She ignored everyone else and lunged towards me, her finger with its bright red nail polish pointing right at my face. She was so close I could smell her strong, expensive perfume. "You old woman," she roared. "All pretense gone. Are you insane? Or have you finally gone senile? Who gave you the right to sell this house? Who do you think you are?" Stephen had snapped out of his shock by then. He rushed to his wife's side, his face turning pale with a mixture of anger and fear. He didn't ask about my health, didn't care why I was here instead of the hospital. The only thing he cared about was that this huge asset was about to slip through his fingers. "Mom," he echoed his wife, "what the hell are you doing? Do you have any idea what you're doing? This is my house, your son's house. How could you just decide to sell it? Your house?" I repeated, my voice terrifyingly calm. For an entire year, I had been silent. I had endured. I swallowed my tears, listened to the criticisms, served as an unpaid maid, and ate their leftover scraps. But today, that silence was over. I straightened my back, something I hadn't been able to do for a long time. I lifted my head and looked directly at the man I once loved more than life itself, and at his cunning wife. An unprecedented strength surged through my old veins. "Be quiet," I commanded. My voice wasn't loud, but it was powerful and filled with an authority that stunned both Stephen and Tiffany into silence. The entire courtyard fell quiet, with only the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves. I stared directly into Stephen's face, my voice as cold as ancient ice. "Your house? Who told you that? When your father was alive, did he ever once say he was giving this house to you? It's right here, in black and white. The deed to this house is in my name, Eleanor Pierce, and your father's, Arthur Pierce. Now that he is gone, according to the law, this is my sole legal property. I can sell it, I can give it away, I can even burn it to the ground, and I don't need to ask for anyone's permission." Every word I spoke was a sledgehammer, shattering their fantasies and their greed. Tiffany stammered, You wouldn't dare. This is the Pierce family home." "The Pierce family?" I laughed, a sound full of irony. A son who leaves his dying mother in the hospital to go celebrate? A daughter-in-law who is happy her mother-in-law is gone? Do you two even have the right to mention the word family? You gave up your right to be part of this family a long time ago. I didn't give them a chance to say another word. I pointed towards the front door. "I've had enough of you. The bond between us as mother and son was broken the day you hung up on me at the hospital. Now, both of you, pack your things and get out of my house. Immediately." The shock on their faces turned to panic. They had never imagined that this frail, submissive old woman would ever fight back. They looked at me as if I were a monster. In the middle of this storm, I suddenly saw my grandson, Caleb. I don't know when he got home, perhaps at the same time as his parents. He wasn't carrying any shopping bags, just his backpack. He was huddled behind a wooden pillar, trembling, his face pale with fear, looking at me with a complex mix of emotions. Seeing him, the fire in my heart immediately subsided. I turned to him, my voice softening, but still firm with resolve. "Caleb, come over to Grandma." He hesitated, looking from his parents to me. "This is between the adults. It has nothing to do with you," I said, looking directly into his eyes. "Now, Grandma is giving you a choice. You can either go with your parents, or you can stay here with me. If you want to be with me, you stay. Grandma will pay for your education and raise you to be a fine man. My offer to Caleb was like tossing a lit match into a barrel of gunpowder. Tiffany, realizing she had completely lost control, tore off her final mask, revealing the selfish, vicious person she truly was. "Stay with Grandma?" She shrieked with laughter, a sharp and crazed sound. "With a dying old woman? A broke old woman who sold the house and doesn't have a penny to her name? Caleb, I'm telling you, if you choose to stay today, you can forget you ever had a mother." Stephen, after his initial shock, was also consumed by rage and desperation. He was no longer a weak-willed son but a cornered animal. He pointed at my face and started cursing me with the most vile words. "You vicious old woman, you're not my mother. My mother would never treat her own son this way. You'd rather trust strangers than your own flesh and blood. Fine, you want to sell the house? Sell it. I want to see if anyone sheds a single tear for you when you die old and alone. I want to see how you live with all that money by yourself." They cursed me, hurled the cruelest words at me, but strangely, I didn't feel pain. I only felt pity. Pity for their stupidity and their shallowness. They still thought what I wanted was money, or for them to take care of me. They would never understand that all I ever wanted was a little love, a little respect. The couple and James stood there, shocked and embarrassed. They had just witnessed the rawest, ugliest kind of family tragedy, but their presence also confirmed one thing. My decision was absolutely right. Then, the cruelest thing happened. After venting all their anger, Tiffany and Stephen didn't even glance at their son. They didn't ask Caleb what he wanted or how he felt. They turned and rushed back into the house, not to pack all their belongings, but only to grab the most expensive items, designer clothes, handbags, watches, laptops, anything they could turn into cash. They walked right past Caleb, as if he were invisible. In that moment, in their eyes, their son was less important than a leather bag. Less than 10 minutes later, they dragged out 2 large suitcases. Tiffany walked in front, her face a mask of stone-cold fury. Stephen followed. As he passed me, he stopped and shot me a look filled with pure hatred. "You will regret this. I will never forgive you for the rest of my life." He turned and walked away, dragging his suitcase. Before leaving, Tiffany turned back and threw one last sentence at me like a curse. "Let's see how you survive all alone. Let's go." The heavy wooden door slammed shut behind them. Their footsteps faded into the distance and then disappeared. The house suddenly became eerily quiet. The storm had passed, leaving behind only the ruins of what was once a mother-son relationship. I stood there, my body swaying slightly. After the anger subsided, the exhaustion from my age and illness washed over me. I felt drained, but I did not fall. In the silence, I felt a slight movement. It was Caleb. He wasn't crying, though his eyes were red. He didn't scream or beg his parents to stay. He had stood there silently, witnessing their choice. He had seen with his own eyes that in their mad lust for money, he had been abandoned by his own parents. He slowly walked to my side. He didn't say a word. He just gently reached out his still young hand and took my wrinkled, age-spotted one. His hand was warm, and that simple, firm grip said more than 1,000 words. It was a choice, a promise, an act of loyalty. The tears I had been holding back for days finally began to slide down my cheeks, but these were tears of relief, of comfort. I looked down at my grandson, and he looked up at me. In his clear eyes, I saw a reflection of myself. I squeezed his hand tightly. In the most terrible storm of my life, when I thought I had lost everything, I discovered that I still possessed the most precious thing of all. After that terrible storm, a strange peace settled over the old brownstone. Life for the two of us, grandson and grandmother, began a new chapter, simple and warm. Caleb, after the trauma of being abandoned by his parents, grew up overnight. The timid, hesitant boy was gone, replaced by the true man of the house. In the mornings, he would wake up to sweep the courtyard and water the magnolia tree. He learned how to go to the grocery store. Our meals were no longer fancy, hypocritical feasts, just a simple soup and bread. But for some reason, they tasted more delicious than anything before. We would eat together under the awning of the porch, talking and laughing. Even though it was just the two of us, Our voices were enough to chase away the cold silence that had shrouded the house for a year. That peace lasted for exactly 1 week, a week as brief and beautiful as a dream. On a sunny morning, as Caleb and I were in the kitchen preparing vegetables, there was a sharp, urgent knock on the front door. The sound was impatient, completely out of sync with the relaxed rhythm of our quiet street. Caleb ran to open it. Standing there was a man in a court officer's uniform, his expression stern and emotionless. He glanced at Caleb, then asked, "Is this the residence of Miss Eleanor Pierce?" "Yes, sir." "You're looking for my grandmother? Is there a problem?" Caleb answered politely. The man didn't answer. He stepped past Caleb into the courtyard, his sharp eyes scanning the area as if searching for a criminal. He saw me standing on the kitchen steps, still holding a handful of green beans. "Are you Eleanor Pierce?" he asked, his tone more like a command. I nodded, a sense of dread rising within me. "Yes, I am. Can I help you?" The man said nothing more, simply pulling a sealed envelope from a worn leather briefcase and handing it to me, a court summons. "Please sign here to acknowledge receipt." My ears were ringing. A summons? Why would the court be sending me a summons? I had lived an honest life, never done anything to wrong anyone, never had any trouble with the law. My hand trembled as I took the envelope. It felt unnaturally cold and heavy. Caleb rushed to my side, steadying my arm. Shaking, I broke the seal. Inside was a neatly typed, clear document, a legal complaint. And when I read the name of the plaintiff, my entire world turned upside down. Plaintiff, Stephen Pierce. Defendant, Eleanor Pierce, my son. The son I carried for 9 months was suing his own mother. I read on, each line, each word, a needle piercing my skin. He was suing me for fraudulent transfer of inherited property. In the complaint, he stated that as the sole son of the late Arthur Pierce, he was legally entitled to inherit at least half of his father's estate, which included the brownstone. He accused me of being mentally incompetent due to old age and colluding with outsiders to illegally sell the property, with the intent of seizing the entire inheritance and depriving him of his rightful share. He was petitioning the court to halt the sale of the house and force me to give him half of the proceeds. The complaint slipped from my trembling fingers. The world spun, and a sharp pain shot through my chest, a pain far worse than when I had collapsed from high blood pressure. The blood rushed to my head. I couldn't breathe, and my vision went black. To be betrayed by a husband is called despair. To be backstabbed by a friend is called heartbreak. But to be sued by the child you carried, the child you raised with pain and sacrifice, to have the sacred bond of mother and child dragged through a court of law over money, there are no words in this world to describe that kind of pain. It is far worse than being pierced by 1,000 arrows. A knife to the heart will bleed, but the wound can eventually heal. This was a knife to the soul, leaving it to bleed and shatter into 1,000,000 pieces. I thought, after everything that had happened, that my heart had grown hard enough. I thought I would never again cry over those people. But I was wrong. The tears came again, hot and scalping, filled with rage and the ultimate agony of seeing a mother's love valued in dollars and cents on a legal document. What kind of thing had I given birth to? Was he a man? Or a monster in human skin? A heartless vampire? "Grandma, Grandma!" Caleb's panicked voice pulled me back from the abyss of despair. He quickly grabbed me as I swayed, helping me to the stone bench under the magnolia tree. His face was pale, his eyes filled with tears. "Grandma, don't scare me. Take a deep breath, Grandma," he said, rubbing my chest with his small hands. I tried to take a deep breath, but the air felt like a stone in my lungs, weighing heavily on my heart. I clutched my grandson's hand, feeling every muscle in my body tremble. I had underestimated the depths of my son's depravity. He didn't just want the money, he wanted to kill me. He knew I had high blood pressure. He knew I couldn't handle a shock like this. This wasn't a civil complaint. It was a death warrant he had sent me. Just as I felt I was about to collapse, to give up on everything, Caleb suddenly stood up. The fear on his face was gone, replaced by an extraordinary resolve, a decisiveness that a 16-year-old boy shouldn't have. "Grandma, wait right here for a minute." Without another word, he ran into the house, into the room that had once been my and Arthur's bedroom. I watched him, confused, wondering what he was doing. I heard a clattering sound, the sound of furniture being moved. A few minutes later, Caleb came back out, carrying a heavy object in his arms. It was the old sandalwood box my husband had treasured, where he kept his most important documents and belongings. Caleb set the box on the ground, then ran back inside. This time, he came out holding a dark red, silk-brocaded box with a small brass lock. He knelt before me and held up the brocaded box with both hands, his voice serious and filled with an indescribable emotion. "Grandma, before Grandpa passed away, he called me into his room alone and gave me this box and its key." I stared, frozen, at the box in my grandson's hands. Caleb continued, his voice like he was reciting a sacred last wish. "Grandpa told me to keep it safe and not to let anyone know about it, not even my parents. He said he was worried about you. He told me that I was only allowed to take this box out and give it to you when my parents were treating you their worst, or if something major and urgent happened that threatened you and this house. I think now is the time." Every word Caleb spoke was like a warm stream, slowly nourishing my heart that had been desiccated by pain. Arthur, my husband, even from the next world, he was still worrying about me, protecting me. He had seen it all, had anticipated this very day. With trembling hands, I took the box. It wasn't heavy, but it felt as if I were holding all the love of my late husband. Caleb took a small brass key from his pocket, inserted it into the lock, and turned it with a soft click. Shaking, I opened the lid. Inside, there were no jewels or gold, only two items resting neatly on a yellow silk lining. One was a stack of yellowed letters, tied carefully with a red string. The handwriting on them was so familiar it made my heart ache. It was Arthur's. The other item was a document with the official red seal of a notary public, looking very formal and legal. I picked up the letters first. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped them. I took a deep breath, and the familiar smell of old paper and ink filled my nostrils, bringing fresh tears to my eyes. But this time, they were tears of longing and gratitude. I opened the first letter. "Eleanor, my dearest wife, by the time you read these words, I will likely be long gone. Please, do not grieve too much. Life and death are the laws of nature. My only regret is that I could not stay with you longer, could not walk with you on the rest of your journey. Eleanor, there is something I have kept hidden in my heart, something I never dared to tell you for fear of worrying you. But now, I must. Stephen, our only son. I saw his true nature long ago. He is not a bad person, but he is a coward. He has no backbone, and he listens too much to his wife. As for our daughter-in-law, Tiffany, her greed is a bottomless pit. I have seen the way she looks at this house, at our antiques. It is not the look of appreciation, but of possession. I knew that once I was gone, they would not let you live in peace. I worried so much for your future. I spent my life with you and never let you suffer a single hardship. I cannot accept the thought of you living in humiliation in your old age. Therefore, I have made arrangements on my own. You may be angry with me for being so decisive, perhaps even for being so cruel to our own son. But Eleanor, a father's love is not about condoning wrongdoing. Protecting you, protecting our life's work, that is my greatest responsibility. In this box, besides this letter, there is a legally notarized will that I had drawn up long ago. It is a weapon, the last shield I can leave to protect you. When the time comes, use it. Do not hesitate. Live a peaceful and happy life. That is my greatest wish. Farewell, my love. Your husband, Arthur Pierce." I clutched the letter to my chest, sobbing uncontrollably. He knew everything. He had seen it all, but he bore the worry alone because he didn't want to burden me. My husband, thinking only of me until his very last moment. After I composed myself, I shakily picked up the remaining document. The will. I turned it over, page by page, reading every clause carefully. The more I read, the more astonished I became, until finally an incredible strength rose within me, sweeping away all fear and pain. The will was written with perfect clarity, with no legal loopholes. Article 1. I, Arthur Pierce, bequeath all of my assets, including all bank savings, antiques, and specifically the brownstone located on Union Park Street in Boston, upon my death, to be given in their entirety to my wife, Mrs. Eleanor Pierce. Mrs. Eleanor Pierce shall have the full and sole right to use, rent, sell, or otherwise dispose of this property, without requiring the consent of any other person. Article 2. Upon the death of Mrs. Eleanor Pierce, should any of said property remain, it shall be transferred in its entirety to my only grandson, Caleb Pierce. Article 3. As for my son, Stephen Pierce, due to his years of failing to perform his filial duties, his lack of character and ambition, I have decided to leave him no property whatsoever. Not one single cent. The will bore Arthur's signature, the signatures of 2 witnesses, and the bright red seal of the notary public. The date of notarization was 2 years ago, just a few months before my husband passed away. I closed the will. The declaration of war my son had sent me had been answered, not by me, but by his own deeply disappointed father. The shield my husband had left me was stronger than steel. On the day of the hearing, the sky over Boston was overcast, with dark clouds rolling in, just like my heavy heart. I, a 75-year-old woman who should have been enjoying her golden years surrounded by family, was now forced to dress in my most respectable clothes and walk, trembling, into a courthouse. By my side was Caleb. The boy wore a crisp white shirt, his young face set with an unusual determination. He held my hand tightly, the warmth from his palm giving me an invisible strength. Behind us was our lawyer, Mr. Chen, a calm, middle-aged man I trusted completely. He had reviewed my husband's will and letter and had said only one thing: "Mrs. Pierce, rest assured, justice is on our side." We had just reached the corridor outside the courtroom when we ran straight into Stephen and Tiffany. They were with a young lawyer, looking confident and smug. In stark contrast to my weary appearance, they were dressed to the nines. Tiffany wore a designer dress and flawless makeup, trying her best to look like a poor victim, a devoted daughter-in-law fighting for her family's rightful legacy. Stephen wore an expensive suit, trying to project an image of a mature, stable head of the family, unfairly treated by his own mother. When Tiffany saw me, she curled her lip in a sneer, a look full of malice. She walked closer and, in a sharp, sarcastic tone loud enough for everyone to hear, said, "Well, look who it is. Mom, you actually came? I thought your health was too fragile for a place like this. You really should be at home resting. A courtroom is a place for laws and evidence, not for telling sob stories and crying, Mom." I said nothing, just looked at her calmly. Perhaps my gaze was too serene, because the smile on her face faltered for a moment. Stephen came over, avoiding my eyes, and muttered, "Mom, I didn't want it to come to this, but you forced my hand. That house was Dad's life's work. It's our family home. By selling it, you're committing a crime against the whole family. I'm here today to get justice." Justice. Hearing those words from his mouth was the height of hypocrisy and shamelessness. I squeezed Caleb's hand tighter and walked with my lawyer into the courtroom, leaving their venomous words and false faces behind. The courtroom was spacious and cold. The judge sat high on the bench, his face stern. On either side were rows of benches for the plaintiff and the defendant. Only a few feet separated the 2 sides, but it felt like a chasm that had opened between a mother's love and betrayal. The trial began. After the tedious administrative procedures, Stephen's lawyer began his opening statement. He stood up, his voice loud and persuasive, attempting to paint a tragic story for his clients. "Your Honor, members of the jury," he began, "today we are here to address a deeply painful case, a case none of us would ever wish to see. My client, Mr. Stephen Pierce, is the only son of the late Mr. Arthur Pierce and Mrs. Eleanor Pierce. Since the founding of our nation, it has been a moral and legal tradition that a son inherits from his father. The son is the one who carries on the family name, who inherits the family assets to care for his parents and the family legacy. This is not just tradition, it is the undeniable right and wrong of the matter." He paused, looking around the courtroom, as if seeking agreement. However, after the death of her husband, Mrs. Eleanor Pierce, due to her advanced age and diminished mental capacity, was swayed by the ill advice of outsiders and unilaterally decided to sell the ancestral family home. Your Honor, this is not just a physical asset, it is a spiritual legacy. This action not only deprives my client of his legal right to inheritance as stipulated by state law, but it also tramples upon the love and care of his parents and violates the cherished moral traditions of our society. He went on, citing statutes regarding intestate succession when there is no will, trying to portray me as a senile, unreasonable old woman, while my son and daughter-in-law were the suffering heroes, fighting to protect their family's heritage. Throughout his entire speech, I sat in silence. I glanced over at the other side. Stephen had his head down, pretending to be in pain. Tiffany periodically dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, putting on a perfect performance. They were confident they would win. They believed that both the law and morality were on their side. The entire courtroom seemed to be moved by the lawyer's emotional words. Finally, he finished. The judge turned to our side. Does the defense have a response? Mr. Chen stood up calmly. He didn't rush to rebut, nor did he show any anger. He simply cleared his throat, and in a steady, clear voice that echoed through the courtroom, said, Your Honor, members of the jury, counsel for the plaintiff has just delivered a very passionate and moving statement. However, that entire statement is built upon a single, flawed assumption. He paused, his sharp gaze fixed on Stephen and Tiffany. That assumption is that the deceased, Mr. Arthur Pierce, my client's late husband, passed away without leaving a will. The room fell silent. Stephen and Tiffany snapped their heads up, their eyes wide with shock and confusion. Their lawyer frowned, looking completely caught off guard. Mr. Chen didn't give them a moment to recover. He opened his briefcase, took out a document carefully protected in a sealed plastic sleeve, and walked forward to present it to the court clerk. Your Honor, this is a legally executed and fully notarized last will and testament, created by the late Mr. Arthur Pierce on March 15th, 2 years ago. We ask the court to review it. In that moment, time seemed to stand still. The courtroom was utterly silent. All eyes were on the document being solemnly handed to the judge. The rustling of the paper sounded deafeningly loud. No, that's impossible. Tiffany was the first to break the silence. She stammered, all confidence gone, replaced by pure panic. How can there be a will? My father-in-law never mentioned anything. Stephen looked as if he had been struck by lightning. His face was as white as a sheet, his lips trembling, unable to form a single word. He couldn't imagine that his quiet, unassuming father could have planned such a brilliant and ruthless move. The judge examined the will carefully, checking the seal and signatures, then instructed the clerk to verify its authenticity with the notary's office. A few minutes later, the clerk returned and confirmed with a nod. It was all legal and valid. Stephen's lawyer looked ashen. He knew the game was over. His entire opening statement had just become a ridiculous farce. The judge held up the will, his voice firm and authoritative as he read the most important clauses aloud to the court. In this will, the deceased, Mr. Arthur Pierce, makes his intentions perfectly clear. Article 1. All of his property, including the real estate located on Union Park Street, shall be left in its entirety to his wife, Mrs. Eleanor Pierce, who shall have the sole right to use and dispose of said property. He paused and looked directly at Stephen. Article 3. As for his son, Stephen Pierce, due to his failure to fulfill his filial duties, Mr. Pierce has decided to leave him no property whatsoever. Collapse. That is the only word to describe the state of my son and daughter-in-law. Tiffany let out a piercing scream. No, it's a fake. It must be a forgery. She conspired with someone to fake the will. I don't believe it. But her shouting only served to expose her greed and shamelessness even more. Stephen completely slumped over the table, his shoulders shaking violently. He wasn't crying from remorse, but from rage, from losing everything. The house was gone. His reputation was gone. The judge slammed his gavel down hard, the sound decisively ending Tiffany's tirade. Order, he commanded. This will has been verified as completely legal and valid. According to the law, when a legal will exists, the property is distributed according to the will's instructions. Statutory inheritance rights do not apply. He looked from us to the plaintiff's table, his voice devoid of emotion. After reviewing the evidence and hearing the testimony, This court has reached a final verdict. The entire courtroom held its breath. This court hereby dismisses all claims made by the plaintiff, Mr. Stephen Pierce. Mrs. Eleanor Pierce holds full and sole ownership and right of disposal of the property on Union Park Street. All legal and court fees are to be paid by the plaintiff. Court is adjourned. The final gavel strike sounded like a hammer on a coffin nail, burying all of Stephen and Tiffany's hopes and greed. Justice had been served. They not only got nothing, but they were also utterly humiliated in front of dozens of people. The whispers, the looks of contempt and pity were all directed at them. Their performance as the devoted, wronged children had ended in catastrophic failure. I let out a long, slow breath, feeling as if a great weight had finally been lifted from my chest. I didn't feel joy or satisfaction, only a profound sadness. Winning a lawsuit against your own son is the most bitter victory in the world. I took one last look at Stephen. He lifted his head, and his eyes met mine. In them, I saw no remorse, only hatred and emptiness. I knew, from that moment on, I had truly and forever lost my son. I turned away and didn't look back. Caleb squeezed my hand. "Grandma, let's go home." I nodded. "Yes, let's go home." My grandson, Mr. Chen, and I quietly left the courtroom, walking past the spot where my son and daughter-in-law sat frozen like statues. We walked out of that cold building, and miraculously, the dark clouds outside had scattered. Bright sunlight shone down, warm and gentle. The justice of the law had been served. But for them, the judgment of conscience, and of a higher power, was perhaps just beginning. After the trial, everything moved quickly. With the court's clear judgment, there were no more legal hurdles. The Chen couple, who had witnessed the entire ugly drama of my family, were even more determined to own the house, treasuring the legacy behind it. They didn't haggle over the price at all. In fact, they offered a price above the market value as a sign of respect for me and my husband's estate. On the day of the signing, Caleb and I returned to the house on Union Park Street one last time. It stood there, classic and silent, but in my eyes, it was no longer a battlefield, but a memory. The Chens brought a well-prepared contract with clear terms. When I signed my name on the paper, my hand did not tremble. I didn't feel like I was losing anything. I felt like I was setting a long-imprisoned spirit free. After all the paperwork was done, Mr. Chen solemnly handed me a wooden box containing the full payment, but it was his wife's words that moved me most. She held my hand, her eyes full of sincerity. "Mrs. Pierce, please don't worry. We promise we will take good care of this house. We will cherish every brick and every tile. Your husband's spirit will surely be at peace. And whenever you and Caleb want to come back and visit, you are always welcome here." I smiled and nodded, thanking them for their kindness. Before leaving for the last time, I told Caleb, "Wait for me outside for a little while. Grandma wants to be alone for a moment." He understood and quietly walked out the front door, leaving me alone in the space that was once as familiar to me as my own breath. I walked slowly through the house one last time, saying a final goodbye to the past. I went into the courtyard and stood under the magnolia tree. The flowers were gone for the season, leaving only green leaves rustling in the wind. I reached out and touched the rough bark of the trunk. I closed my eyes, and I could almost feel Arthur's presence nearby. "Old man," I whispered, "I'm leaving now. I've done what you asked. I've protected our home, and I've found it a new owner worthy of it. You can rest in peace now." I went into the main parlor, where the family portraits hung. I lit one final stick of incense, the smoke curling upwards, carrying my farewell. I walked through the living room with its dark wood furniture, remembering all the mornings my husband and I shared coffee there. I walked through the kitchen, where I had cooked thousands of meals, some of them seasoned with tears. I walked into the bedroom, where I had spent so many sleepless nights worrying. Every step brought back a memory sweet and bitter, happy and painful. But now, it was all in the past. I no longer belonged here. I came to this house with nothing, and now I was leaving with that same feeling, only with far more scars on my heart. I walked out the front door and didn't look back. I gently closed the two heavy mahogany doors, and the sound of the deadbolt sliding into place was crisp and final, like closing a long chapter of my life. With a third of the money from the sale, I bought a condominium in a quiet, modern part of the city. It wasn't large, just 2 bedrooms, a living room, and a small balcony with a view of a green park. It didn't have the historic grandeur of the old brownstone, but it was bright, clean, and most importantly, it was ours. It was a new beginning, free from the shadows of the past. Our new life, my grandson's and mine, flowed like a quiet river. I no longer had to wake up early to toil for an ungrateful family. I had more time for myself. Every morning I would wake up, and Caleb and I would do some light stretches on the balcony before making a simple breakfast together. I had time to read the books I loved, to do needlepoint, to brew a pot of good tea, and sit on the balcony for hours, just watching the clouds go by. Caleb, after everything he had been through, had truly become a mature young man. He was not only devoted, but he was also incredibly diligent in his studies. He knew that our future now rested heavily on his shoulders. He threw himself into his schoolwork like never before. After school, he would come straight home to help me with cooking and cleaning. At night, after his chores were done, he would sit at his desk and study late into the evening. Seeing his silhouette hunched over his books under the lamplight, my heart ached for him but also swelled with pride. He was my hope, the dawn at the end of my life's long road. One day, he brought home a report card with a perfect score. He didn't brag, just quietly placed it on the table for me to see. I picked up the paper, and tears filled my eyes. I hugged him tightly. "Caleb, you are Grandma's pride, and you are your grandfather's pride too." He just smiled, a gentle smile. "I'm going to work even harder. I want to study architecture in college, so I can build Grandma a house even more beautiful than Grandpa's." In our small condo, laughter replaced sighs, sincere care replaced false words, and unconditional love filled the void left by betrayal. One afternoon, my old friend Carol came to visit. After we chatted for a while, she hesitated, then told me something. "Eleanor," she said, her voice tinged with pity, "do you know how Stephen and Tiffany are doing these days?" I shook my head. After the trial, I had no desire to hear anything about them. Carol sighed. "I only heard this from someone else, but after they lost the case, they couldn't stay in Boston. Without the house as a financial safety net, their life is very difficult. Stephen's small salary, which they use to supplement, now has to cover everything. And Tiffany, you know how she is with money. Now that she can't afford designer brands or spa days, they say she's become unbearable." She continued, "I heard they had to rent a small, damp apartment in the suburbs. Once the money was gone, so was their love. They fight every day. Stephen blames her for being greedy and pushing him into this mess. Tiffany screams at him for being a weak, useless man who couldn't even hold on to his own inheritance. The neighbors say you can hear them yelling and throwing things every single day." Carol didn't finish, but I understood. I sat there silently, feeling not a shred of satisfaction, only a vast, ocean-deep sadness. He was, after all, the son I had carried for 9 months. I never wished this kind of life for him. But this was the path they chose. You reap what you sow. They were paying a terrible price for their disrespect and bottomless greed. That price wasn't just money. It was the destruction of their family, the contempt of their community, and perhaps a lifetime of a guilty conscience. I don't wish them well, but I don't curse them either. I have simply erased them from my mind. They are now just strangers who happen to share my blood. I have taken back what was mine, not the house or the money, but the right to live, the right to be respected, and the right to have peace in my final years. Caleb placed a plate of cookies he had just baked on the table. He smiled at me, a smile as bright as the morning Sunday grandma. "Have some hot tea." I nodded and took a sip. The tea was fragrant and sweet. Looking at my devoted grandson beside me, at the peaceful life before me, I knew that my new day had finally, truly begun. Thank you for watching. I hope today's story has resonated with you. For those who haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the subscribe button so we can be here with you every day. Let's grow together. We'll see you in the next one.